Today's video blog is focusing on the books by Kathy Hoopmann, starting with All Cats Have Asperger's Syndrome, and I'm talking about them as they are books which I use when I'm trying to explain various special needs to parents and to children. So All Cats Have Asperger's Syndrome I got soon after it was published, and I have used it so much. All four of her books, and I'll talk about them all in a moment. So you've got All Cats Have Asperger's, Inside Asperger's Looking Out, All Dogs Have ADHD, and All Birds Have Anxiety, her most recent of these four. I have 2 copies of each. That's how much I use them. So I always have a copy in the house, even when one of my copies is on loan. The reason I find these so useful, so just putting them down, is because they explain things which are very sensitive areas sensitively. They do explain them incredibly sensitively, and in ways that both children and parents can understand. So you're using animals. You've got All Cats Have Asperger's, and it explains different aspects of Asperger's. Now, I know that Asperger's is now part of ASC or ASD, depending on which acronym you're using at the moment. They're all part of autism now. Speaking to someone with autism, they would argue that there's a big difference in aspects of autism with Asperger's, but that's a conversation for another time. They talk about characteristics. So here you've got they prefer squidgy places to a hug. Not all. These are all some of the characteristics. What's important when you're looking at these books is that not every child with a condition, firstly autism is a spectrum, people will have some aspects, not all. So it will talk about different aspects, so different characteristics. So you've got, for example, he uses up some of his 9 lives all too quickly. Beware of the dog. Okay, different traits that you've got here. An Asperger's child often has exceptionally good hearing, and loud sounds and sudden movements may scare him. As I say, not all of these are true for everyone, but these are very useful in sharing with parents. So you have the book, you're discussing things that they've noticed about their child, or things that the school have noticed about their child, and you're using the books to sort of talk them through it. And what I've found is, by having the book there, parents will be looking through the pictures and going, oh gosh, yes, she's like that, or he's like that, and just saying, oh, I can relate to that one. Children will be like, yeah, that's me. And there are some very sad bits. You've got, for example, let's have a look. When he talks, he goes on and on about the same topic. I like black mice and brown mice and white mice and so on. And it says, and bore people silly. But then it says, then he says something that makes them stop and think. So I'll say something amazing. Did you know that a mouse and a man share 97.5% of the same DNA? So remarkable facts. And they marvel at his bright, intelligent mind. So you've got different aspects. They show the positive as well as the what might be deemed the negative aspects. The creativity in seeking answers where others may not look. So they look at, as I say, the positive, but they also see the worries, the fears, sometimes not appearing to have many friends, the importance of daily rituals. There's all sorts of aspects. And just going through this book, having the book open, the fact that it's with animals and cats, it can really be more calming, easier to receive some of the messages. So this one is very much talking about the characteristics. Then the next book was actually All Dogs Have ADHD, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the one that goes with this is Inside Asperger's Looking Out, and I've often used these together because this one, using not just cats, by the way, this one uses all sorts of animals. This one gives you the perspective of the child, or the person with Asperger's or autism. So again, it starts by saying, we're not broken. Don't try and fix us. Different. not broken, and that's really important. Different can be good. It talks about the fact that different can be good, unusual friendships, all sorts of things. But it explains things like some of the fussy eating, as it appears to be. It isn't about being fussy. These things are actually difficult for the person to cope with. It talks about various sensory issues. These ones are focusing very much on sensory issues. This is the one that always gets me, this dog covered in clothes peg. I know that without having loads of sensory issues and being on the spectrum, I know if I've got a label in the back of my top, I will cut it out even if I'm wearing the top. And I have a lot of tops which have got holes just at the back where I've literally sort of like dragged it round and sort of cut it off while I'm wearing it. That's me. Imagine that exaggerated, imagine that more so, and that's how it must feel. This is where labels like makers like Born Anxious, who do clothes without labels. Marks and Spencer's have a line of school uniform that doesn't have seams. These things make a big difference. If, you know, when I've got a label in the back of my clothes, I am not going to be focusing 100% on whatever I'm meant to be focusing on, because I'll be thinking, oh gosh, that label, that's really getting to me, it's itching. It's even more so for somebody who has real sensory needs. It also, and this is something which I find very, very good, it talks about the meltdown that we are used to. We've seen it. If we work with anyone on the spectrum, we'll have seen the meltdown. But it makes it clear that a meltdown isn't something the child wants. It's not pleasant for the child. This isn't somebody behaving up, being naughty. This is genuine. And I think that's really important. Sometimes when things get so bad and we can't explain how we feel and we have no idea how to control our situation, we may yell and scream and throw our bodies around. This is called a meltdown. Meltdowns are not fun. We cannot control them. We never choose to have one, and hate them when they happen to us. Often we get punished for having one, which is so unfair, as believe us, the meltdowns are punishment enough. That is really powerful. And to have these books to use with parents, with teachers, with children is incredibly useful, because it helps people to understand. And we now know that in the Code of Practice, behaviour isn't one of the areas of need. It's emotional, mental health, things like this. So there's an understanding that the behaviour is the result of, not for its own sake. And that's really important. With all her books, she talks about the positives, the good things about having any of these, being on the spectrum and so on. So this is the inside Asperger's looking out. Fantastic. So her second book was All Dogs Have ADHD, and it makes me smile, because the minute you think of a dog, puppy bouncing around, you know, you can see ADHD. And it goes through the same format, again using dogs. I've used these with adults as well as children. So adults who think, oh, have I got ADHD? I've gone through the book with them or left them with the book, and they've been like, oh my gosh, that's describing me exactly. And that's really helpful pre-diagnosis and post-diagnosis. But, you know, when somebody's thinking, do I, don't I? Obviously, this is not a diagnosis tool in itself, and I am not suggesting that. However, they are useful when you're exploring the reasons for certain behaviours. It talks about lack of sleep. It talks about attempts to escape areas. The world was meant to be explored, this need to just be doing everything. It's that living in the moment idea, and going for something that you're interested in. It also talks about the immense concentration that can come with ADHD, the fearlessness, which can be very worrying, especially for parents. But the fact that you may be fearless, but you can get hurt, so it is a worry. The fact that you lose things, you're not deliberately losing things, and you can't find them even if they're in front of your nose. These are all sorts of attributes, again, very much like the Asperger's one, and just as useful, and again, not just useful for the child and the parent, but also for colleagues, for teachers, who are just getting so wound up by the behaviour that they're not looking at what's behind the behaviour and what strategies might help to alleviate some of the difficulties that are occurring and some of the behaviours that they don't want. There's a reason for the behaviour, it's not naughtiness as such. So you've also got his mind works better when his body is in motion and he finds it hard to sit still for long. That's important. So we need to find reasons and ways for our children to be on the move. If we are sitting somebody at a desk, making them sit still and sit quiet and get on with their work, that is not fair on somebody who's ADHD. So we need to, if they have ADHD, they need to be able to work in a way that suits them. Again, there's the look at, there's this idea of being protective. That comes up in the All Cats Have Asperger's. It comes up here that parents and people who love the person who has ADHD or who is on the spectrum can feel very protective towards them. And that's very understandable, because there are areas of need that need to be addressed. But there's lots of positive things, the bubbliness, the fact that, again, they can often get to the very top of their chosen area because they've got that staying power. They can actually really focus on the things that matter and disregard everything else, and they've got that energy to get up and go. And again, it talks about how boring it would be if we were all the same. So it looks at the positives as well. So again, another book that's very useful. The most recent one, a few years old now, All Birds Have Anxiety. This time we're on birds, obviously. And it talks a lot about the different character traits and how you might feel, and sometimes just knowing that you're not alone, knowing that these feelings are legitimised and recognised can be incredibly helpful. And it helps parents to understand, oh, she just won't get out the house. There might be a reason for that. And that if parents can have a look at books like this, if teachers can, you know, this business of being frightened of getting something wrong, for example, and then nagging the child, it's not necessarily helping the child overcome the anxiety. So understanding it from the child's perspective, the child or the adult, I've used this with adults as well as children, the person who is anxious, realising that they're not alone, that can be incredibly powerful and helpful. So with all of these books, with everything that Kathy Hoopmann has produced, I just find them remarkable, I find them incredible. I find them a really good tool for discussing those very difficult areas, having those difficult conversations. The fact they're animals, the fact they're photos, I think is very reassuring for the person you're discussing it with. And they work with, as I say, adults who have these conditions, parents, children, teachers. I've found them so useful, as I say, 2 copies of each book. That's quite a recommendation. So this is what I would have in my toolkit every time. All birds have anxiety, all dogs have ADHD, all cats have Asperger's, inside Asperger's looking out. And thank you, Kathy Hoopmann, because I think they are fantastic.